It is my honor to call up now a moderator for our next panel, Extremism on Campus, Johnny Chavkin, who's the Senior Vice President at Prosodic Partners in DC, and he's formerly a CIA speechwriter, brings over a decade of experience in government communications, diplomacy, and analysis. Thank you, Johnny, for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think we're running about 20 minutes behind, which if you've gotten coffee with Michael Greenwald means you're on time. If we could please have the panelists come up right now, and then I'll introduce all of you, please. So I know there's been a lot of excitement or anticipation about this panel. Extremism on campus and online hate. We live and work in an environment that at times feels as though it is filled with so much hate, so much anti-Semitism and extremism. It can be very overwhelming to turn on your phone to see what happens every single day. Today we have a panel of 4 outstanding individuals, experts who will help us make sense of the madness, how we got to this point on campuses and online, and perhaps provide a constructive way forward. Far left, we have Shabbos Kestenbaum, a student activist and the lead plaintiff against Harvard University for systemic antisemitism. Knew that was going to get a round of applause. A recognized speaker on Jewish communal issues with contributions to national media and testimonies before the U.S. Congress. Next, we have Vlad Khaykin, is the Executive Vice President for Social Impact and Partnerships, North America at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, where he spearheads policy changes to reduce acts of anti-Semitism and hatred. A recognized expert in the field of extremism, he's previously served in key roles at ADL and AJC. Amjad Taha, a political strategist and analyst from the UAE, is a prominent figure in global geopolitics. He's appeared on various media platforms, including CNN and Fox News, Sky News, and numerous Arab media outlets. He's also the author of The Deception and has an upcoming book, Philosophy of Peace. And last but not least, Gertler serves as the executive chairman and CEO of the U.S. News and World Report, where he has overall responsibility for both editorial and business operations for this digital media company. I'm not going to do him justice, but Eric has impressive experience in public service and economic development, as well as philanthropy at universities, and has written extensively on key policy issues, including, since October 7th, leadership on university campuses. If you could please give me a round of applause for our panelists today. So Shabbos, I'd love to start with you. We talk conceptually about hate, but how bad is it on campuses right now?
Sure. Well, first of all, even though I'm a Trump supporter, me facing this direction is not a commentary on not talking to the left. The chair is not a great placement. Sure. I'll start by saying this. First of all, for those of you who were there a few months ago when I spoke at the Palm Beach Synagogue, nothing has changed. I still am single, so your Jewish granddaughter still should be here. We'll talk about it later.
If a shidduch comes out of this event, I say the most successful
no, that's the real reason.
talk we've ever had.
That's the real reason I do these things. So look, I can spend hours and hours talking about the physical assaults against a Jewish student at Harvard Business School. I could talk about the Jewish undergrad who was spat on for wearing a kippah at Harvard. I could talk about the Israeli student at Harvard who was told by her professor to leave the classroom because her nationality made other students uncomfortable. I could tell you about the Harvard professor who vandalized all of my hostage posters, writing on Kfir Bibas, whose funeral was today, quote, "His head is still on, where is the evidence?" Writing on Noah Argamani that Jews are best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who then challenged me to debate him in a secluded underpass as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11, and then posted a video of him waving a machete with a picture of my face saying he wanted to fight and he has a plan to bring down the Zionist mafia. By the way, to this day, I had private armed security outside my house for a week. I had a guy with a gun follow me to Chabad to make sure I was okay. To this day, Harvard has not once responded to any of my emails or phone calls inquiring about this individual's employment status. It is inconceivable that any other minority group would be treated with the disdain, the disregard, and the contempt that Harvard University consistently, historically, and routinely treats its Jewish student population. And I gotta say, I'm from New York. Nobody's perfect. I don't, although to be fair, I'm sure like 90% of you are from New York too, and you're all retired here, right? But I gotta say, I don't know the donations or the contributions that this community makes, but if any of you are still donating to Ivy League universities, I am telling you, as a matter of fact, you are hurting Jewish students on college campuses, you are amplifying anti-Semitism, and you should stop immediately. I'll close by saying this. We filed a lawsuit in last January, against Harvard University, outlining the obvious Title VI of the Civil Rights Act violations and their violations of federal law. Harvard's response when we filed the lawsuit was not to come to the negotiating table, it was not to apologize, it was not to recognize the reality of anti-Semitism. They filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning they were asking a judge not only to toss out our lawsuit, but to set a legal precedent so that no Jewish student in the future could hold them accountable for anti-Semitism. We filed an amended complaint, an update to our lawsuit in June. Harvard's response was literally the exact same thing. No apology, no recognition, no negotiating table. Our judge, Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, issued a 25-page scathing ruling against Harvard, writing in part, quote, "The facts as pledged show Harvard failed its Jewish students." He tossed out, wait, it gets better, wait, no, just give me 10 seconds.
Oh,
then you
no,
can
no,
applaud.
I do the crowd work.
And then,
All right.
10 seconds. And then, he dismissed Harvard's double motions to dismiss, and we are the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a college campus. Now you can clap. And this will finally get legal precedents and legal protections for Jewish students on college campuses, and it is a damn shame we have to sue them in order to get it.
No, thank you. Quite the portrait you portrayed about Harvard and the Ivy League, but I would ask Eric, you speak with college presidents all the time, you know the campus world very well. Is this an outlier, or is this emblematic of what campuses are like nowadays?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Michael Greenwald for inviting me. When he said, "Will you?" before he finished the sentence, I said yes. So I didn't know what I was committing to, but it's both a pleasure and a responsibility to be here. So I do, by virtue of my position at U.S. News, I talk to many of the university presidents, certainly all the Ivy League presidents. They're not always, easygoing conversations. But I also have had a perspective into the schools by virtue of having done public service in the state of New York, and also philanthropically. And I will tell you, we stopped our donation to Columbia University, which, what you just heard, in some places, in few places is an outlier, but at places like Columbia, it's as bad as anywhere in the country. And, the real issue is, I think, there's certainly, the anti-Semitism that we see everywhere. But on university campuses, it's obviously critical that there's free speech, and that free speech in an environment where people can share and foster ideas and learn from each other and create knowledge that passes on to the next generation. But what we saw on campuses is free speech does not mean unlawful conduct. Free speech does not mean violence. Free speech does not mean you get to spit on students, that you get to break into buildings, that you get to stop classes, that hecklers get the vote. It also means that there's safety for everyone on campus. And the problem that happened on these university campuses is a failure of leadership, where many of these presidents were fine with free speech, but did not want to set the consequences for those that violated free speech and violated certainly the free speech and safety of Jewish students on campus. And so there were no consequences. There were not students that were and should have been expelled, suspended, gone to jail. There was no protection done for Jewish students. And these universities failed their mission, where they should have been teaching and not hiring ideologues who would push their own ideology. Now, I can continue going on, but in many ways, some of these campuses are completely broken. And that's the responsibility of many of us, and we can get into that later. But in fairness, there were a number of schools that did do a good job. Up at Dartmouth, Vanderbilt, University of Florida. Many of those were leaders who were out there on the front lines, protecting Jewish students, protecting free speech, setting guidelines, and making sure that universities were doing what they were supposed to do.
Excellent, thank you, Eric. Amjad, any thoughts on the state of discourse on U.S. college campuses from your perspective?
Well, to start with, thank you for having me. And I'm proud to be from a country, UAE, a country that's a country that doesn't think anti-Semitism is an opinion. In my country, I'm proud to say anti-Semitism is a crime, not an opinion. In my country, in one of the graduation that we had in one of the universities, one student comes from the United States of America, dead, to raise the flag of some other country which actually would upset the Jewish community and the Jewish student there. 3 hours after that, they were on the airplane deported to the United States of America. And also I am from a country that makes it very clear. Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas is the armed forces of it, is banned. We banned them. We banned the Muslim Brotherhood. But you know where is Muslim Brotherhood is active? It's active in Columbia's University. I went to Columbia's University for one reason. Me and Luay and others with us, we went to Columbia's University for one reason, because we think when the Holocaust happened, there are people who celebrated it. There are people who participated in it. And there are people up to this stage, they denied it. And when the 7th of October happened, humanity was tested again. There are people who actually celebrated it all the way in DC streets and in London. There are people who actually, up to this point, academics and intellectuals who are denying it. And there are people, those people we want to be, who put the hand for that Jewish family, for that baby Kafir's family, and to say, we don't stand with the kidnapper of yours, we stand with the humanity, we stand with that woman, we stand with a nation that survived before. And I'm proud to say, when I saw what I saw there, he was a student. Those were not student, Jewish normal student. They were not. I don't think any Jewish student is a normal student in any university, the ones I came across. They're not, they're soldiers. The real soldiers. They stood as people were chanting against them, against their identity, against King David's star. And I seen it when they snatched it from a girl, a student girl. I saw that. But she came back again and again. And she goes back and she studies. Be proud of yourself if you're from that nation.
Thank you for that. Very powerful. Now, Vlad, I want to get you involved. You've studied these issues extensively. Why is the discourse so pernicious on college campuses specifically? And how would you evaluate the state of play on campuses around the country?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, look, as Hitler infamously said, he who owns the youth owns the future. So it should be incredibly frightening to all of us to see what is going on campus. And, first of all, I agree with you. We should be proud of people like Shabbos and all the students who have become soldiers on campus. And at the same time, we need to acknowledge what a sad state of affairs that is. That our students, our young people, cannot be on campus and focus on getting their degree, gaining knowledge, right? Getting professional skills that they can use in their career, and instead they have had to become activists, advocates, soldiers on their campus. And we are, of course, proud of them for doing that. We need them to do that. But it is sad that that is happening. And I do think that, some of the things that Shabbos has described are representative of the the state of higher education in our country today. So just to share a few statistics in terms of what students on campus are dealing with today. 83% of Jewish college students say that they have either experienced or witnessed an act of anti-Semitism since 10/7. 83%. 41% of Jewish students have felt the need to hide their Jewish identity. They're taking off their kippot, they're hiding their Magen David necklaces, they're refusing to share their Jewish identity with other students on campus for fear of where that will lead, and they are certainly feeling increasingly uncomfortable sharing their positions on Israel. In a place where academic inquiry should be the hallmark of that experience, instead they are being threatened and intimidated into silence, into not being part of that dialogue, not being part of that discussion. And 92% of Jewish students will not report these incidents that they are experiencing to campus authorities, precisely because of the kind of response that Harvard has given Jewish students who have raised these issues. They do not trust these administrators. They do not trust these campuses to get it right. And that is a disaster. It is a disaster. If a previous speaker said that anti-Semitism is a global, it's a global emergency, and I think that's exactly right. It is well past time that we start viewing it in exactly that way. Because if we do not, we will lose the Jewish future. Anti-Semitism doesn't only function by physically attacking Jews, by isolating them and marginalizing them. It also raises the cost of being Jewish so high that many young Jewish people will simply opt out of being Jewish, doing Jewish, affiliating Jewishly, or even identifying Jewishly. So if we do not get our hands around this issue now, we are in danger of losing the Jewish future.
Thank you for that. So how did we get to this point? October 7th, yes, as a catalyst, as a watershed event, but has this been bubbling up for quite some time? What are the organic causes, and more interestingly, what are the outside forces that are fostering this situation? Vlad, and then I'd love Amjad and Eric to please comment.
Well, look, we have to understand that, yes, some of this is happening because of grassroots activists and people who are very passionate about the things that they are advocating for. That is true. We also have to recognize that it is not entirely organic, right? That the phenomena that we are experiencing, the fact that 2022 had the highest level of anti-Semitic incidents that we have ever experienced in the United States on record, and then 2023 happened, and there was a 140% increase over and above the highest year on record, right? That isn't entirely organic. Last year, Avril Haines, the head of US national intelligence, confirmed that regimes like Iran are pumping anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist propaganda into our country, that they are fomenting civil unrest, and leading to the kind of increase in anti-Semitic incidents that we have seen. Now, we are several decades, I would say, behind the curve on this, right? This has been going on for decades, and we have sort of not had our eyes on the prize. Back in the 1960s, the Soviet Union began doing this, right? And they focused on campuses in particular. They focused on colleges, universities, academics in particular. Why? And why is this continuing to happen today? Well, it should be pretty obvious. If you want to reshape the way that masses of people think about the world, think about your regime, think about your political ambitions, whatever the case may be, where do you target in a society? You target the sites of knowledge production and knowledge certification. Where do people go to find out what is true and real about the world? They go to colleges, universities, research institutions, journalists, academics, right? If you want people to believe your pernicious, racist ideas, that Israel is an apartheid state, that it's a colonial settler entity, that Zionism is fascism, all of these things, how do you get people to believe that? Well, you need to give them the air of intellectual or academic integrity. So as far back as the 1960s, the Soviets understood this, and they created an entire new discipline called Zionology to give the air of academic legitimacy to outright anti-Semitism. And that is continuing to this day, that countries like Qatar, like Iran, like Russia are pumping this poison into our countries. We need to recognize that not only is this a global emergency, it is also a national security vulnerability in our country.
No, thank you. Eric and then Amjad, please.
So when we think about what's happened on university campuses, I mean, and what's going on today and for the last 20 years, this is nothing new. If you go back and look at the parallels in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, one of the first things that was done was the universities were taken over. Scholarship that did not support their ideology was taken over and focused on sort of Nazi ideology. In our country, at our university campuses, it's been a number of different factors. I will tell you that a number of years ago, not knowingly, at U.S. News, I was in a fight over the rankings. And really what it turned out to be was very clear that universities did not want to be held accountable for anything. They wanted to be in their ivory towers and not be held responsible for anything that goes on. So that attitude has gone on for a while. But you add on to that what the last speaker said, all of the foreign money that's gone into many of these universities, which is very, very difficult to follow. They always say, follow the money. But it's very difficult to follow how the money comes in from overseas that go into nonprofits, that go into different departments. And so because of that money, over the years, there were many departments, mostly in the social sciences and arts, that became centers of ideology and not centers of teaching. I've got a lot of firsthand experience at Columbia. You've seen that happen. And that just led to, environment that was completely tense, unacceptable, unbearable for many Jewish students. And add on to that, a series of ineffectual leaders at university campuses that really should not have been leaders and not understood the true purpose of a university. So,
I think what happened was very negative, right? But in the same time, I think it's also positive, in a sense that maybe a lot of the Jewish community needed this awakening. Maybe many of those students were not awake of their responsibility towards civilization, towards their own country, their own identity. They were not active enough. Maybe when you were not active enough, the other side was active, and it was very active in poisoning those students. I mean, we have in Gaza those hostages that we pray for them to be freed all. But in the same time, all the way in New York and DC, you have people who are hostages of the propaganda of Hamas all the way there. So we have two types of hostages. For those we pray, for this one, I don't know if we pray or we should take more action to educate, because they can be at one point be used against their own society and community, and they can become at one day a small anonymous educator in a university and teaching you a certain ideology that would not support the civilization. I think it's very important that we acknowledge, one, there was a lack of participation. There was at one point the students, they were not, you need to represent your identity more. And you should ask the question, yes, you have freedom of speech, okay, but it's not a holy book. It can be reviewed, it can be changed. If a person all the way in Dubai can wear a kippah and show his identity, and can have in New York University, in Abu Dhabi, he can put his kippah and not be bullied or insulted, or not even one case. We have 80,000 students, international students, not even one case of anti-Semitism. But that is not the case in Columbia's University or New York University or other university. Then you have an issue. That should be investigated and looked into.
No, it's fascinating. And Shabbos, I want to get you back involved.
Can I answer that?
You have the mic? Of course you can.
Okay. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today, it's 4% Jewish. It's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's because there's been a deliberate and systemic campaign to crack down on the amount of Jews at Harvard University. Penn, Columbia, MIT, NYU, they all purport to show the same drop in Jewish participation. And while it is easy for us, as we should, to talk about the dark money and the adversarial countries like Russia, China, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, number one, there are policy prescriptions for it. The Deterrent Act. Unfortunately, like most good pieces of legislation that would combat anti-Semitism, Chuck Schumer let it die on the Senate floor. If the Jewish community were to galvanize support and to be on Capitol Hill and to force someone like Chuck Schumer to put it to a floor vote, Jewish students would have been protected. Every time I testified on Capitol every time I testified on Capitol Hill, you know who was there? Code Pink, with their bloody hands and their globalize the Intifada. You know who wasn't there? Jewish leadership. Students were testifying to empty rooms. And I'm not going to say the nonprofits, but there were 2 Jewish nonprofits that discouraged us from filing a lawsuit to begin with. And I got to tell you, I was with Prime Minister Netanyahu 2 weeks ago when he was in D.C., and I told him that in the same sense that Abigail Adams wrote this letter to John Adams saying, remember the ladies, I said, remember the students, because a lot of us students feel really hurt and abandoned by our Jewish leadership, by the Jewish establishment and the nonprofit, and we are the ones who are going to talk about Zionism in spaces where you're not meant to talk about Zionism. We are the ones who are going to continue to wear kippahs, to fly Israeli flags on Harvard and Columbia and Penn, and Jewish students are not being amplified. And I got to tell you, this is where I get into so much trouble. But I don't really eat at the gala dinners anywhere, so I don't mind if they don't invite me anymore.
I think you're going to get invited back to the 5th summit. By the
yeah,
way.
okay.
Keep going.
But you know, all these major Jewish nonprofits, they're run by good people. I know them; they're all good people. But Jonathan Greenblatt himself, I was in the Knesset when he said it. He said a month ago that we at the ADL have been unable to turn the inferno of anti-Semitism. And I was there, and it occurred to me, so there's going to be this national reaction. Okay, we need new leadership. We need new strategies. And nothing came of it. And I cannot understand why Jewish students, we're not good at what we do. We don't know how to give speeches. We don't know how to fundraise, because I'm broke. But we're doing it because we have no other option. And why are we the ones who are on the front lines? It should be the adults in the room, but the adults in the room aren't doing much.
So Shabbos, what you're describing a great deal of problems, but you're at your core describing an issue of safety, both intellectual and physical. What would you want the campus or the college administrations to do? What's the prescription that you have for this moment?
Turn their buildings into parking lots. So I think Alan Garber is the best example of this. Alan Garber is the president of Harvard University. He took over the plagiarist, and Alan Garber was the one who was in charge during the encampments. I was followed for 3 weeks. Every single day, I was followed on my way to class. I was recorded. I was monitored by my fellow classmates, safety marshals. They would tell us where we can or couldn't go on campus. They would record me. They would write down which buildings we were in. We told the university president and the president of the United States, but story for another time. We told the university president that we were being followed and intimidated on our way to class. And you know what Alan Garber did? He told the encampment leaders, he told them, if you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with the Harvard Management Corporation to oversee Harvard's $50 billion endowment to talk about divestment from Israel. If you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with senior Harvard faculty to discuss the establishment of a Palestinian Studies Center. Of the hundreds of students and professors who took part in the encampments, 0 were suspended. So you're not going to dictate or legislate your way out of an ideology. Racism is an abhorrent ideology, and I condemn it. But there will always be racists, unfortunately. However, you know what the difference is? If you have a bus driver who tells an African American to sit at the back of the bus, you know what happens to that bus driver? We haul his ass to jail that day. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, our response is we'll go to a Holocaust museum, which 1, gives them pretty good ideas, and 2, you can go to as many Holocaust museums as you want in the world, and you will never walk away with an understanding of what Judaism is, what Jewish culture is all about. You'll simply see Jews at our weakest, and you'll feel sorry for us. I don't care if people think we have horns. I don't care if they think we control the media. I really don't care. What I care about is if they act on those manifestations, if they throw rocks through our synagogues, if they throw rocks through the dorm windows, which I've experienced. And you know what the only solution is for that? Just prosecute crime. It's literally not rocket science. All you have to do... And Columbia University is a perfect example because the roughly 160 people who were arrested for the illegal occupation of Hamilton Hall for taking a maintenance worker hostage, 140 of them were released the next day. We have created a culture of a crisis of accountability, and people, especially lawbreakers, are immune from prosecution. And the only way you are going to deter these universities from treating any student, Jew, Christian, Muslim, black, white, from treating them with the crap that they treated me and other students is punishment. Professors need to be fired, not for free speech. We have nothing against free speech. Our lawsuit does not mention free speech. They need to be fired for canceling classes and telling their students to go call for an intifada, and then, this is true, and then donating to the GoFundMe campaign to the 2 assailants at Harvard University who physically assaulted a Jew. That is true. We need to discipline students who violated all the time, place, and manner restrictions, who interrupted our classrooms, who burnt American flags. And yeah, we need to be transparent about the hundreds of millions of dollars that Harvard enthusiastically receives from anti-democratic, anti-Western, anti-Semitic countries like Russia, China, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. I'm not interested in whether they like Jews or not. I really do not care. I'm interested if they act on those manifestations and if they commit crime. crimes. And if they commit crimes, they should be punished. Last point, and then I'll shut up. I was in LA like 2 days ago. They took me to the Adas Torah synagogue. You have heard of it because that's where there were those riots, where those masked keffiyeh-worn idiots were preventing Jews from going inside the synagogue. And Joe Biden, the next day, condemned the event on Twitter. And I'm glad he did that. That was the right thing to do. He said, this is so abhorrent. However, you know what would have been a lot better than condemning the event is for the President of the United States to say, right now, the Department of Justice has a hate crimes task force, which exists. I've met with them. All we're going to do is mobilize the hate crimes task force, and any person who was caught on video preventing a Jew from worshiping inside their synagogue, we are going to arrest them. That is the only practical solution. I don't need condemnations. I need action.
All right, so based on that, Eric, I want to ask you about the role of philanthropy in here. I think our audience would be quite interested in this. What can be done when engaging, when giving to universities to help shape the discourse in a positive, constructive way?
So I just want to repeat some of those points because I think those are very important. When you think about all the things that a university campus should and shouldn't be doing, I mean, first of all, and this goes to whether you're a philanthropist, you're a trustee, you're an alum, you're a parent, whatever the case may be, because and I think you're exactly right. Free speech has to be central to the mission. But when you go over free speech, when it's hate speech, when it's intimidation, violence, that is unacceptable. And as we saw, there were no consequences. There were not students being expelled, students being suspended. There was no leadership on campus. So first and foremost, we need to make sure that universities do what they're supposed to be doing, because that has not happened. The second thing is, before I get to the accountability of philanthropists, is the greater transparency that's needed. Some of the points that were just raised, I mean, we have no sense truly of the money that's going into university campuses. We think we do, but we don't really, because it's very hard to track that money through nonprofits. In terms of data of students, there's been a number of acts. We have no sense of what the true data is with regard to the students. And the crime data, which is really interesting, I sat with university administrators about 2 years ago to start to collect crime data. We wanted to do a separate ranking for US News on safety on campus. And I heard every excuse under the sun why there's something called the Clery Act, why this data is not good. It'll be disproportionate for urban schools versus rural schools, you name it. We're now looking at a different way to use the data. That needs to be tracked, that needs to be followed. But lastly, in terms of accountability, we all have a responsibility. I think in terms of what we've done, with our philanthropy, for example, we have given our money over a long period of time. And we've done that so that we can keep track of what universities are doing. Are they living up to the values? Are they doing what they say they're supposed to do? I have a very close friend who gave a very large donation, well north into the 8 figures to one of the business schools in the Ivy Leagues. And they gave all the money up front, and this guy's father was a huge Zionist. The program went from, after his death, to being focused on, essentially anti-Israel issues, and there was very little that they can do about it. And I think that as parents, as philanthropists, universities have to earn their money. And by the way, today, more than ever, universities are going to have to start to be incredibly responsible. The science dollars, which I'm very concerned about, because we need to do great science in this country, but that's going to put a lot of pressure on the universities. They're going to start to track down on foreign dollars. If foreign students don't come to universities and pay full freight, that puts huge pressure. So if it's so it's going to put even more important burden on philanthropists to watch what happens on these universities. And just in terms of those who are giving, do a letter of intent as opposed to an agreement, so you can fully track what happens.
Vlad, what are the constructive steps that can be taken on campuses to deal with this issue?
Well, first of all, I really agree with Shabbos about what he said specifically on Holocaust education. Look, Holocaust education is very important. I don't think anybody in the audience would disagree with that. We have to preserve the memory and the lessons of the Holocaust, absolutely. As an intervention against anti-Semitism, though, it's insufficient. We know it's insufficient. We've known for a long time that it's insufficient. There's been, countless studies done on the efficacy and the ineffectiveness of Holocaust education. It is effective at some things. It is effective at fostering upstander behavior, right? People who go through Holocaust education are less likely to stand by in silence while their fellow students are being harassed with anti-Jewish invective, for example. But I also think that in a way, Holocaust education has been part of the problem. And I'll explain why. And that is because the only time that most people get any education about anti-Semitism, it's within the context of the Holocaust, which does what? It narrows the scope of what they can recognize in terms of anti-Semitism to a particular form of anti-Semitism that is largely no longer with us. It is not the form of anti-Semitism that threatens Jewish communities today. Anti-Semitism is constantly adapting and evolving, and it has moved on in the last 80 years. So when people get anti-Semitism education as Holocaust education, what they understand to be anti-Semitism is a far-right, Central European, mid-century form of anti-Semitism, right? That's not what we're dealing with today. And so when I go and try to educate college and university administrators so that they can recognize when an act of anti-Semitism has happened on their campus and respond appropriately, they have no trouble when it's swastikas, when it's Sieg Heils, when it's jackboots and calls to gas the Jews. But when it turns to anti-Zionism and calls to globalize the Intifada and all of these kinds of things, they have no clue. Suddenly they're confused. Is it anti-Semitism? Isn't it anti-Semitism? And here's what really, sort of grinds my gears about the way that this discourse is generally happens, is that it's always abstract. It's always on the level of theory and abstraction. Is anti-Zionism a form of anti-Semitism? Isn't it? Well, let's bring out the definitions and let's see if this incident maps onto that definition, et cetera, et cetera. Why do we do this? There are millions of Jews alive today who have lived experience with anti-Zionist regimes. In Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Tunisia, in Libya, in the Soviet Union, in Poland, in Hungary. Ask us what it was like to live under an anti-Zionist regime. Because in every society, every single society that embraced anti-Zionism, it led to more or less the same set of outcomes for Jews. Discrimination, dispossession, displacement, and mass violence. Every single time. Across continents, across cultures, across religious communities, it was more or less the same disease process. So what we need to start doing is doing anti-Semitism education in the proper way, to give these administrators the tools to understand and recognize anti-Semitism, particularly in the forms in which it exists today, not in the forms that threatened our great-grandparents. Because that's not useful.
No, this is fascinating, and I believe we have 5 minutes left. So this is, we're a people of hope. This is, I know from the rabbi, a community of hope. We're going to end on a positive note, or at least we're going to try to. What gives you hope now? What gives you hope that this process or this problem isn't just going to be admired or assessed, as Michael said, but that we can do something about it? Amjad, please.
What gives us hope is this, is us here. It's me and the rabbi has been speaking for weeks to make this happen. It's the fact that he invited us. The fact that this 5 years ago would have not existed. We never had this relationship. The fact that I'm sitting here speaking about it. The fact that we hear each other gives us a lot of hope. The fact that when speaking about the Holocaust education, I disagree with you on the fact that it has a huge effect. And in fact, in my country, we have Holocaust education and we have the Holocaust Memorial Gallery that exists in Dubai. The fact that when we have the synagogue right next to a mosque, right next to a judge in the Abrahamic family house, right in the center of Abu Dhabi, right in the center of the Middle East, it sends a great signal. And the fact that when the 7th of October happened, they thought, you know what? That's the end of the Abrahamic Accord and they're going to close the embassy. We didn't. The ambassador of Israel was walking around Dubai and Abu Dhabi with his guards and his people. Literally didn't have any insult and he was operating. The embassy did not. It's the only embassy actually in the Middle East that did not close. That's what your students, they need to hear. That's the light That's the light in the darkness. You know, when it's too dark, maybe you are the light in that darkness. The fact that 106 air flights that goes back and forth before and after the 7th of October, they did not stop a day, even though the American airline, the British airline, and others, they stopped. We didn't stop. Some of the reserves, they went back and they fought those evil Hamas terrorists because they went through the transport and the transfer and so on. And I'll finish with this. Tell those students that they do not know what's happening in the Middle East, and you live far away from the Middle East for you to be an expertise. You cannot sit here and tell me your expertise in the Middle East. I live 2 hours away from Iran, 3 hours away from Afghanistan, 3 hours away from Iran. Not the best place to be at, but we know what we're talking about. When Gaza had about 80, literally 8 children suffering from cancer. Because of the Abrahamic Accord and the relationship that UAE has with the state of Israel, we communicated. The Israeli government helped to put them on the aircraft, send them from Ramon Airport all the way in Dubai where they're getting treated. They're no longer a human shield for Hamas, and those children are getting treated because of Israel and UAE. That's the future.
Thank you for that. 1 minute for each. Shabbos, what gives you hope?
I have anecdotal evidence of hope. So one of the first things I did after October 7th was I went to Israel, and I remember I was in Boston's Logan Airport checking in with like 15 duffel bags of bulletproof stuff, I don't even know what, and there are 20 people to the right of me with American flags, with Israeli flags, they're blasting Hebrew music, they're throwing candy at us, and this young girl comes up to me, I'd never seen her before, haven't seen her since, I don't know her name, I'm telling you she could not have been older than like 14, and she comes up to me and she says, here, I want you to have this, and she hands me an envelope, and I realize what's inside the envelope, it's dozens and dozens and dozens of $100 bills, and I go to this 14-year-old girl, and I say, there is no way I can take this, and I kid you not, she wraps her arms around me, and with tears rolling down her eyes, starts screaming, please, please, take it from me and promise me you will give it to the first person you see in Israel. That is the story of the Jewish people and Jewish peoplehood. And I was in Aventura a couple of months ago, and I always joke because it's Aventura, the average age of the audience was like deceased. And as I'm talking,
Shabbos danger.
I know, the joke doesn't land so well in Florida, but... And as I'm talking, this woman raises her hand and she says, I want to add something. And she says, my name is Regina. This happened like 3 months ago. I am 103 years old, not doing much to beat the stereotypes. I'm a survivor of Majdanek. I'm a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. I'm a survivor, and I fought in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. I want you to know, she says, we will get through this because we've gotten through it before. And then she sits back down. And I'll close by saying this last point. I was part of the delegation with the Israel Foreign Ministry about 3-4 weeks ago, and they took us to the Kerem Shalom border crossing, which is on the border with Gaza, Egypt, Israel. And the IDF wanted us to see the 800 humanitarian aid trucks that go into Gaza every single day. And this is not a commentary on the politics and whether Israel should or shouldn't be doing this, so leave that to one side. As we are seeing these 800 humanitarian aid trucks go into Gaza, there was an IDF soldier standing next to me. I can't say her name, but she was like 22, she's younger than me, and I asked her, looking at all these trucks of feminine hygiene products, of baby formula, all going into Gaza, I said, how do you feel about this? She said, well, I feel a little conflicted. I said, why do you feel conflicted? She says, I feel conflicted because my cousin is a hostage. I said, what? She said, yeah, my cousin is Idan Alexander, who is the American Jewish hostage still being held by Hamas. And regardless of what you think of the politics and whether we should or shouldn't be aid to Gaza, that's not the point. The point is what a remarkable testament to the Jewish people, that our own family members are being held captive, but nevertheless, we will not allow that to destroy our own sense of humanity. That is a powerful, powerful testament to this 3,000-year-old story that is tragic, that does not always have the best of ending, but is also miraculous and beautiful, and what an immense privilege that every single day I get to get up and be part of that story.
Thank you for that. Eric, in 1 minute, what gives you hope?
So first of all, I'll say, hope makes for a great breakfast but a lousy dinner. Thankfully for the Jewish people, as we define every holiday, there was a war, we suffered, so let's eat. So it's the eternal hope of the Jewish people. I'll just say two things. One is on college campuses, there are models that work. There are models at Dartmouth, Vanderbilt that have shown to work, that have shown that this is a workable solution. And when they don't, we know that there is a large, active Jewish population, students alike, who know now to keep an eye on college campuses. In terms of Israel, I was in Israel a few months after October 7th. The country was really broken. People were hurting. I mean, not just from October 7th. Many people and families had those who were, in the war. People were suffering. The rockets were coming in. But the sense of resilience among the Israeli people, the sense that that the Israelis were on the land that had been the land of our people for thousands of years, and the idea that there was no going backward and that the only way is to have hope and to look into the future, and the sanctity and care of humans and of the individual, which is why we care so much about getting back the hostages, because every life that matters, and those values give me hope.
Thank you. Vlad, take us home.
So I'll say three things give me hope. First of all, the incredible students, the incredible young Jewish people that we have on campus like Shabbos who are fighting the good fight. They really deserve all the applause and all the respect in the world. They have not been cowed. Many have. Many have. Many are hiding. Many are hiding their Jewish identities. But so many others since 10/7 have really leaned into their Judaism, into their Jewish identity, and into the fight for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel. Secondly, our allies. Our allies both in this country and abroad. The Abraham Accords, the flourishing of the Abraham Accords, I think gives me a lot of hope. And the fact that we have allies now throughout the Arab world is, I think, a tremendous source that things are going into a better direction. And lastly, I think the thing that gives me hope is keeping this moment in perspective of the broader sweep of Jewish history, very similar to what Shabbos actually said. So I think I'll say it like this. Many of you probably know this anecdote, but it goes like this. There is a young Jewish person talking to their great-grandparent and saying, things are really tough for Jewish students at Harvard University. Right? And the great-grandparent turns and says, "There's Jews at Harvard University?" He says, "Well, yes, but you see, you should see the kinds of things that they say about Israel on the Harvard campus." And he says, "There's a Jewish state?" We have to keep things in perspective, right? We have survived far worse, and this too shall pass. We are a resilient people. We are survivors. And we'll survive this too. Am Israel Chai.
So thank you all. If you could all give a round of applause to our panel, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.